All right, hello and welcome back to the show. This is me in editing, continuing on from last episode. So we uploaded part one of my second part of my Dynasty rookie rankings, I guess. So part one of the 8 through 18 rankings, that should be live on YouTube now. And this is going to be part two, a continuation of that, going through my fourth tier of rookies. So if you haven't listened to that first part, where I went through the 8 through 13, or even the video where I went through my top 7 from a few weeks ago. Make sure you go check those out before jumping into this. But without further ado, let's continue on from where I left off in my last episode.
All right, so let's jump into tier 4 now. I'm going to try to speed it up for this tier. There are still 5 guys I want to cover today, but we're going to have to go through it a bit quicker. There is a good blend of positions within this tier. You're going to see my first quarterback, a couple running backs, a couple receivers. These are the type of guys that I'd be looking at towards the top to middle end of your second round. And if you can get some of these guys as they fall back into the back half of your second round, I think that's amazing value for these players. I think all these guys are going to be solid NFLers or NFL players. And I do think each one of these guys has the upside to become a fairly good fantasy asset. So with that said, let's get into the first player. All right, so let's get into the first guy. It's Ke'Shawn Vaughn. He is my number 14 ranked rookie, and I think it's a tale of two stories for Vaughn. It seems like there's one side of people that are big Vaughn truthers. They're saying he's the starter. He's Tom Brady's pass catching back. He's going to be a beast. And the others that say, hold up, Ronald Jones was still good last year, and hold the phone on Ke'Shawn Vaughn because people are drafting him too high. So obviously by my ranking at 14, that is probably lower than the general consensus. So you could argue that I'm more in that Rojo camp, but I really don't think I'm at either extreme. And I will break down the player as well as the situation so that you see what I'm seeing and I can justify my ranking of him. So as a player, I see a solid and reliable committee type of back. I think he runs well. He'll get you what's blocked. He has an aggressive running style that might be able to get you a few more yards on some of those plays. I think he can catch the ball well. Nothing special, but good enough. He can pass protect as one of the better pass protectors in the class. And, he's a competitive guy, so I think he's going to really, be a hard-working type of back who's going to be able to find his way onto the field, a guy that the coach is going to like to have on the field, like a guy that the quarterback's going to want to have in the huddle. But what I don't see from Ke'Shawn Vaughn is a big playmaker. I don't think he can take plays and create to get them to the house and make touchdowns. I don't think he's going to make a guy miss in open space a lot. I didn't really see that a lot on the tape. And I don't think he's overly good at any one thing that can be his calling card and really say, he's an elite back because look at that. Look at his great burst or his amazing ability, his amazing juke move. He's going to always make the guy miss, or he's got the elite speed to take things all the way. And I just don't think Vaughn has that. And so as a player, a solid committee back. He's also 23 years old. There is a track record that says, older running back prospects don't seem to translate well. People don't know exactly what it is, but they just don't seem to have that ability to translate well to the NFL. So something to, again, be mindful of. And then the other thing that's important about that is he's going to be 27 when he's looking for his second contract. Running backs nowadays who are 27 are, it's really hard to get a second contract. And it's hard to get a second contract to begin with, whether you're 25 or 27. But, the extra years are just not going to be working in his favor. And so I do think that Ke'Shawn Vaughn is the type of guy that a team who's looking at a short window might be looking at, but not a guy who's going to be your long-term answer at your fantasy running back position. If we want to break down the role in year one, I think it is going to be a split between Rojo and Ke'Shawn Vaughn. Rojo is younger than Vaughn. Even though he disappointed in year one, he had an underrated year two. He had a 4.21 yards per carry, as well as he was able to show some more playmaking ability as a runner with more, home run potential than what I think Vaughn has. His 4.21 yards per carry may not be super impressive, but when you compare it to the other backfield mate who was running behind the same O-line, same offense, Peyton Barber, he only had 3.05 yards per carry. So a full 1.2 yards per carry almost for Rojo. So yes, I know Peyton Barber is nothing special, but still, Rojo was able to create where Barber was not. And Rojo still had 40 targets with over a 75% catch rate on those balls, catching 7.72 yards per target. Now, the big knock when it comes to Rojo, I think, is his pass protection. I think he's very weak in pass pro, and I don't think Tom Brady's going to enjoy that, and Tom Brady's going to say, get this guy off my field. So that's going to be one thing for Ke'Shawn Vaughn that will be working in his favor, is I think he's a much better pass blocker, but I don't think that means that Ke'Shawn Vaughn automatically takes over the role from Rojo. Yes, Vaughn is Arians' guy, and I do believe there will be an immediate role for Vaughn, but I think the split will be something like Rojo getting some more work in terms of carries, getting more of kind of what Barber had last year, where Barber didn't have a lot of receiving game, but still had a good chunk of carries, and Vaughn will get some carries as well, but also a bit more passing down work than Rojo. So if I had to predict, I actually made a projection for this one. I would say Ke'Shawn Vaughn's going to look at something like 150 carries for 650 yards, 40 receptions for 300 yards, and 6 touchdowns, which when you use half point PPR, that's going to give you about 150 fantasy points, which would have been RB 26 amongst running backs in 2019. And I do think, that's solid, but I think in the long term, I think that's just going to be what this offense is. Rojo is still young. I think that's 2 years that you're going to be getting same type of thing. Vaughn is probably going to be more of a high-end RB3 this year, maybe a low-end RB2 in his second year. But I think that's all it's going to be. And then, after that, whether Rojo sticks around in Tampa Bay or they bring in another back, I just don't see Vaughn ever being able to take a lion's share of work on. And so if I had to guess what I think Vaughn will be, I think he's a consistent RB2-3 prospect. His upside would be, yes, maybe he could become a volume-based high-end RB2, maybe like RB 15, 16, but that would have to be on volume alone. I don't think the talent is there to become that. And then the floor, there is a chance that Rojo just straight up beats him because he's more explosive and he developed in the pass pro or in pass protection. I know that Rojo's been working a lot on his receiving game. And like I said, he is younger than Vaughn. So, I think the floor here might be like a handcuff Jamal Williams type who can have standalone value as an RB4-5 sometimes just because he will get some usage still, but just nothing special. So, that's where I am on Ke'Shawn Vaughn. I think at this point, if you're desperate for running back, yes, you could be snagging him, but I would still be taking all those other wide receivers I mentioned previously in that tier before over Ke'Shawn Vaughn. All right, the next player on my board, number 15, I believe we're at, that's Bryan Edwards. And so kind of funny, we just talked about Ruggs 2 spots ahead of him, even though Ruggs was the first rounder and Edwards was the third rounder. Now, as a player, Bryan Edwards is a 6'3", 212-pound receiver who can be really used anywhere. If you look at how he was used at South Carolina, he was used in on the outside, in the slot. He was able to run deep over the middle. He was using the screen game, and sometimes he even got jet sweeps. So he's a very versatile weapon. He's got great strength and size, got a good speed-size combo as well. He seems to be fairly athletic. Unfortunately, he didn't get to compete or participate at the combine because of a broken foot, so that is something to monitor. But when you watch the tape, he seems to have good enough athleticism, versatility, and he's got great ball skills and the ability to go up and get it. I think he had a crazy highlight reel grab against Tennessee. You Google Bryan Edwards versus Tennessee, just like shades of Odell Beckham on the goal line, goes up, one-handed grab. So pretty special stuff and a very intriguing prospect. When you look at the production, he actually started for South Carolina as a true freshman, and his breakout age is 17.8 years old. That is in the 100th percentile. That's just unheard of. And then he also he had 4 solid years of production with multiple 800-plus yard years and 4 to 7 touchdowns in each year. Yes, you might say, oh, those aren't that special. We talked about Justin Jefferson, and I said specifically those aren't that special. But, that's on a team where that is fairly high, and that leads the team. When you look at his college dominator rating, his dominator rating is 48.4%, which is in the 94th percentile. So again, just 2 of the most important metrics when it comes to projecting rookie wide receivers to the NFL. He is in the 100th percentile and the 94th percentile, which is something that definitely raises my eyebrows when I'm looking at a prospect. You also consider that he could have come out last year in the same draft as Deebo Samuel, and the 2 of them played together at South Carolina that year. When you compare their numbers, Debo had 62 for 882 and 11. Edwards had 55 for 846 and 7. So only about 40 yards separating them, 7 receptions, and a couple of touchdowns. And that's when Edwards was 19 years old and Debo was 22 years old. So definitely a lot of intrigue with this prospect. I was super excited about Edwards going into the draft, super upset when he couldn't compete at the combine, and I was genuinely very scared he was going to become a day 3 pick in the NFL. But instead, the Raiders take the chance, draft him in the 3rd round on day 2. And it's definitely a very interesting situation where I think if Edwards can carve a role, he's going to be productive. Now, in year 1, I do think it's going to be an uphill climb. He's not going to have an offseason, or as much of an offseason to really develop into this offense. He's coming off of a foot injury. They do have Tyrell Williams, Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, as I said. They also have Henry Ruggs, who is the much higher draft capital prospect, as we talked about before. And so for him to get a full-time role, he would need an injury to one of the main guys. And until then, he's probably only really getting red zone work, and potentially he'll get in because he can be a versatile weapon used in a lot of different facets. He might be able to get in as kind of almost a change of pace wide receiver in year 1. As I stated before, this also isn't a super high-powered offense. They've got average quarterback, average offensive stats, not a crazy amount of targets to go around. So in year 1, if I had to predict the amount of targets Edwards is going to get, I'm only going to say 30 to 40 in his first season. So if you're planning on owning him, he is a guy you're going to have to be patient with. I can tell you right now that next year, I expect his value to be a bit lower than it is right now, just because he's not going to give you production, and people tend to be impatient when it comes to rookies. You know, you look this season, Paris Campbell, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, N'Keal Harry. These guys didn't produce big, but because like some of their reasons are injuries or just didn't get the opportunity. And so, you know, that might be the same for Edwards, but those guys, you can get them for pennies on the dollar right now. So definitely a guy that, you know, if you're drafting, you're understanding that you're going to have to be patient. But in the long term, Tyrell Williams, this is his last year of guaranteed money. Yes, he has a 3-year contract, but I could see them buying him out or just fading him. He's not going to be expensive to them. And I think Edwards has the talent to push him and become the X receiver across from Henry Ruggs, with Henry Ruggs getting to play a Z role. And I do think Edwards projects as more of a target hog, and I don't think Henry Ruggs is going to be the type of guy, as I mentioned earlier, to really suck up a ton of targets. And so I do think in the long term, there's a chance for 100-plus targets here for Bryan Edwards as a guy who can be giving you yearly wide receiver 2-3 numbers with some big touchdown seasons. And so if I had to predict, a low-end consistent wide receiver 2-3 fringe guy. But I think his upside is a mid to high wide receiver 2, depending on his touchdowns. I think this guy is a lot like Robert Woods when I watch Edwards play. Woods can play on the outside. He can play the slot. He can be super versatile. He's a talented player, but he's not crazy flashy. And he's not going to get you a ton of targets or a ton of touchdowns. And so, you know, look at Robert Woods last year. He was lower because he didn't score as many touchdowns. And so, yeah, I think Edwards might turn into that wide receiver 2-3 guy, but I think his touchdowns are going to be what will separate him from his wide receiver 3 seasons to his higher end wide receiver 2 seasons. That's where I see him at. If we're looking for floor, yes, the floor is low. I think there is a floor of him just becoming a possession wide receiver 5 maybe for fantasy, something like a Corey Davis. But I'm buying Bryan Edwards. I just bought him in my most recent rookie draft. I could not be more excited about it. And so, yeah, I'm a very big believer on Edwards, and that's why I have him here at 15. All right, number 16 in my rankings is Brandon Aiyuk. Brandon Aiyuk, drafted by the San Francisco 49ers in the first round of the draft, with San Francisco saying that he was their top-rated wide receiver in the class. Now, I do want to preface this by saying I think when NFL teams say that, people do have to keep in mind NFL teams aren't drafting for fantasy. They're not looking for who is the very best fantasy producer. They're saying who is the best player to match our system. And so Aiyuk perfectly fits what Shanahan wants. And so I don't think Shanahan is truly saying Aiyuk is the most talented player in the draft. However, he was probably him or CeeDee Lamb would be the perfect fit for the San Francisco offense. So it's a great landing spot for Aiyuk. Aiyuk is one of the more athletic wide receiver prospects. He could be a dynamic playmaker from day one. When I look at his game, I see high play speed. He's got great burst off the line. He's got good burst in and out of his cuts. He's amazing with the ball in his hands with great rack ability. He has some good nuances in his route running. All great things that I see, especially when and he can be used in many facets of the game. He can be used deep in the slot, shallow crossers, screens, and that's one of the reasons why landing with Shanahan is so intriguing, because Shanahan likes to have these interchangeable and versatile dynamic playmakers who are great with the ball in their hands. So it's a great landing spot for what he's good at, and the only reason I'm lower on him in terms of his talent is because I do think, like I said earlier with T. Higgins, how T. Higgins is more of a polished wide receiver prospect, I think Aiyuk is more of an athlete prospect. Yes, he has some good route running, but he doesn't have amazing ball skills. I think when I watch the tape, I feel like it looks like Aiyuk is sometimes fighting the ball, which is not what you want to see. You want to see a natural hands catcher, and that is something that he can develop his ball skills. Just get time on the jugs machine, just get repetitions, and he'll get more comfortable. And that's something that when you pair great ball skills with his already very versatile skill set, he could turn into a great weapon. But that paired with, he also lacks some physicality, and so I don't think he'll necessarily be able to win in contested scenarios or fight off contact from more physical corners. I think those are the things that will be holding him back at the next level. If we look into year one, I think the expectation is that you got to think Aiyuk's going to have a role immediately. Kittle will be the number one option in this offense. Debo will still be the number one wide receiver after he had a bomb rookie campaign. He was awesome. I'm a huge Debo fan. I know there are a lot of people out there that love Debo as well. So, I don't think Debo's going away as the wide receiver one. But I do think Aiyuk has a chance to slot in across from Debo as the wide receiver two in this offense, with Trent Taylor, maybe Kendrick Bourne rotating in, getting some slot work as well. Bourne did look good last year, and so I do think there's a chance that Bourne maybe starts over Aiyuk. But I think, they drafted Aiyuk in the first round. You're not just going to draft a first rounder and not potentially give him a chance. And then the other guy here that I think is still a name to keep in mind and potentially a very good buy low in Dynasty leagues is Jalen Hurd. Jalen Hurd was drafted at 303 last year, the third pick of the third round. And he actually looked very good in his preseason appearances before getting injured and having to miss the season. So I do think if I had to put money on it, Aiyuk would be the wide receiver two in this offense to start the year. But definitely something to keep in mind that there are other guys who will be competing for targets. When we look at this offense as a whole, it's still going to be a run-based offense. They were second. They had the second least pass attempts in the NFL last year, and after how the Super Bowl went, I think we can all agree they're not going to trust the passing game a ton. They're going to continue to run the ball. So I do think the run game is going to be dominant, and that's meaning that there's going to be not a ton of opportunity for pass catchers. And I do think Kittle and Debo will still get theirs. So in year one, I'm not going to expect a ton from Aiyuk, even if he sees the field a lot. Maybe 50 to 60 targets in year one. With his rack ability and his athleticism, he could produce you a few meaningful fantasy performances, but for the most part, not a guy you're relying on this season. In the long term, you got to think that that he's going to be able to develop and have a chance to be that number two guy across from Debo. I don't think Debo's going anywhere. Obviously, Debo was just picked last year, so Debo's going to be around for 3 seasons at least, and Kittle is, the guy in this offense. So the two of them will be around a long time, but I do think, this could become a three-headed monster. Aiyuk was a first rounder, and, the way they talk about him, as much as I don't see him being an alpha receiver, he fits the system so well that he could still be giving you productive seasons in fantasy football. I think in the long term, he'll be used very creatively by Shanahan. He'll get some chances in every aspect of the game. And so, Aiyuk may be an 80 to 100 target guy, but he'll have good efficiency when he gets the ball in his hands, and he'll be able to create big plays. So if I had to guess what you're going to get with from Aiyuk, I'm going to say you're going to get like a weekly wide receiver 3 who has boom ability from week to week. I think his upside is potentially like a wide receiver 2 in fantasy, kind of like Tyler Lockett and what he gives or brings to the table. But the floor here, probably similar to like a Curtis Samuel, gadget complementary option in an offense who can be used as like a wide receiver 4 or 5 when it comes to fantasy. All right, just two more guys, and then we can wrap this up. Zack Moss is next. He is my number. What are we at? 17 now, I think, on my board. And Moss is similar to Vaughn in the sense that I think he's another versatile back who can really do whatever asked of him. But I just don't think I don't think there's anything special when you turn on the tape. Statistically, people will point to the fact that he broke a lot of tackles in college. And I think, yeah, when you pair that stat with the fact that he has a very good physical running style, that is an interesting addition to the Buffalo run game. And I think, in the Buffalo run game, they like to have physical runners in the cold weather, and they're going to let the guys run the ball. They're not going to be a heavy pass offense ever. But before the draft, what I wrote about Moss was that, here's the quote, he looks like the RB2 in an offense to another back's 1. And, to me what that means is just, he's a committee back who can be a great secondary piece in a run game, but they would have a more significant fantasy back ahead of him. And I do think that may be the case. My initial reaction was, okay, perfect, a great compliment to Devin Singletary. I actually went out and bought Devin Singletary afterwards because that's how I felt. And I knew the community tended to kind of think otherwise, but I know there's some people that are huge Zack Moss truthers, but for me, I went out and bought Singletary because I think, this is a type of situation where Moss is going to be the 2 to Singletary's 1. This will be a run-heavy team, though. So when we look at it, I do expect Moss to step into a fairly large role in year 1, similar to what Frank Gore had. With Gore out of the picture, there are 166 carries that are now vacated. So even if he just gets those touches, 166 is nothing to sneeze at, although you're not going to produce a ton of fantasy points on 166 attempts. Now, Singletary looked great in his role last year, but Singletary also does not demand a lion's share of touches. He's not built to be your workhorse. He's not the guy who's going to be seeing 300 touches a game. And I do think, the GM came out and said, his comments said that basically we're indicating Singletary will have a similar role to last season, with Moss taking more of a Gore role. And when I look at that, early season Gore last year had about 55% of snaps while Singletary was out, but only 20 to 30% towards the back end of the season, with Singletary having more like 65% of the snaps most of the year, but that got cranked up to 80% of the snaps in the last few weeks when they're fighting for playoffs. So I do think Moss is a much more capable back than Gore at this point in Gore's career. And so if I had to expect or predict the timeshare, I think it would be something like 60-40. But last year, Buffalo averaged 29.1 rush attempts and 29.2 the year before. So very similar, very easy to predict then. For me, that I think this offense doesn't change a ton, and they're probably going to be running the ball again about 29, 30 touches a game. And so with that type of split, I do think, Moss is going to be able to get like 15 touches a game, maybe a little bit less. But I could see Moss getting like 180 to 200 touches, with maybe only 165 to 180 for Devin Singletary when it comes to carries. And then last year, there were 72 targets to running backs and 91 the year before. So I think that's where Singletary is going to make up for more of the fantasy value, with Singletary maybe catching more like 50 or 60 of the targets and Moss getting maybe 25 or 30. So as a whole, I'd expect you're going to see Moss get like 180 carries, 25 targets with some TDs, but still limited by Josh Allen's ability near the goal line. And for that, that's going to be somewhere in the low to mid 100s in fantasy points, which is going to be giving you like RB3 or 4 production. Now, in the long term, I do think this offense will be somewhat similar to kind of what this year's going to look like. Devin Singletary's got 3 years left on the deal. Moss is going to have a 4-year deal most likely, and Josh Allen's not going to go anywhere. But I do think over time Buffalo's going to want to rein in Josh Allen's running ability. Obviously, they're still going to use it, but you look at what's happened with quarterbacks in the past who run the ball a lot. They just tend to not hold up. You look at Carson Wentz, he was a great running quarterback, took a hit to the knee, diving over the goal line, and now, he just hasn't been the same over the past few years. You look at Cam Newton, who was a great rushing quarterback and at once was the number 1 quarterback in fantasy, but now he is out of a job. So I do think they're going to try to protect him by limiting his amount of touches, and I do think when that happens, Zack Moss is going to continue to get a bit more carries. His workload is going to be increased, and so in the long term, I think he's going to be a solid rushing volume based RB3. His upside, I think, could be if he can beat out Singletary, I'm not going to rule it out. I'm obviously a Singletary truther, but there's those out there that do believe Moss is more talented. So if you are in that camp, you're a big Moss truther. I think his upside is a high volume physical RB2, kind of somewhat like Chris Carson. Chris Carson when Rashad Penny was healthy. I think, there was a point there last year where he was just the only guy and he was getting like 30 plus touches a game. I don't think you'll ever see that from Moss unless Singletary gets hurt, but I do think his upside could be like a higher volume, as in like 20 to 25 carries, physical RB2 like Carson. But I do think the risk here is that the floor is something like a change of pace big back who can catch and block. And when I looked for the best comp for that, almost spitting image is Royce Freeman. Philip Lindsay just beat him out for the job. Philip Lindsay isn't a big-bodied guy, so he can't carry a heavy workload. So Royce Freeman still got his, but he just wasn't anything special who was able to create anything. And so then, for fantasy, he's just not an asset that you really, really love. So, I think that's a safe enough floor that you're at this point in the draft. I'd be willing to take him, hoping that he's going to become that high-end RB3, maybe even an RB2. But there's definitely risk here, and I don't know if Moss is ever going to be able to give you RB1 numbers unless there is an injury or something else that happens to Devin Singletary. All right, and let's wrap it up with number 18, the first quarterback off the board for me, and that is Joe Burrow. There's just a point where Joe Burrow has to land. These rankings are one quarterback, half PPR, and so a lot of times in one quarterback leagues, these quarterbacks tend to fall. But there's just a point where you have to take the talent, and the talent here is Joe Burrow. He's a high caliber prospect, and he's going to have immediate opportunity. He brings poise, accuracy, high-end mental processing. He's a blue chip prospect who can make an immediate impact. You want to get him on the field, and he's going to be getting a chance immediately in what I think is going to be a good offense. As I've talked about before, since he's a pass-first team, as I said before, I think he's going to have over 600 attempts in his first season. The weapons are there. A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, John Ross, Auden Tate, Joe Mixon out of the backfield. Even Giovanni Bernard, if something happens to Mixon, hold out, whatever it may be, Gio is still a very capable pass-catching back out of the backfield. So, the weapons are surrounding him. This offensive line should be getting better from last year. They returned some players who were down with injuries. And so I do think, there will be a bit more production. And I think, Zac Taylor's just going to give him a chance. When you look at Zac Taylor was the quarterback's coach, actually, in LA for the Rams during the 2018 season. In the 2018 season, Jared Goff finished as the 7th best fantasy quarterback, and that was the season where teams or fantasy players were looking at Jared Goff and drooling, saying, look at this, we have another top 5 fantasy quarterback. He is the next guy to enter that tier. Then in 2019, Zac Taylor leaves and Jared Goff returns back to a QB2 range, and now you look at where people are at saying, Goff is nothing special. He's a mid-range quarterback too. So, Sean McVay is a great coach, and I'm not going to try to take it away from him, but I got to think that part of that is the quarterback coach, who is Zac Taylor at the time, and then with him leaving, Goff drops back to lower production. You got to think part of that has to do with Taylor, and so if Taylor is actually a very good coach with quarterbacks, then I think this is just a bit of a match made in heaven. Zac Taylor gets his guy. His guy is Joe Burrow, a great, talented rookie quarterback prospect, and I think in year one, there is a real base for him to give you high-end QB2 numbers, or even a chance for him to sniff QB1 numbers in his first year. In the long term, as I said, I think this is a match made in heaven for Burrow. I think, the assets are going to be there. The players, the weapons he has are young, which means in the future drafts, they're going to be able to focus, or in free agency and in the next draft, focus on the offensive line, getting him protection. This defense is not there yet. The defense is not where it needs to be to shut down other offenses, so you're going to see plenty of shootouts where Burrow's going to be asked to be throwing the ball, and I expect that to be for a few years. So, if I had to guess, I think Burrow is going to become a mid-range quarterback 1, a guy who's giving you somewhere between quarterback 5 and 10 numbers year over year. And, at this point in the draft, the fact that you can get that type of asset, who can be an asset for your team for 10 years, 15 years, there's just a point where you have to take that. If you have quarterbacks or not, this past weekend, I've talked a bit about this draft that I had. I have Kyler Murray and Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan is still a great fantasy quarterback, and Kyler Murray is breaking out as potentially a top 5 dynasty quarterback. I know I have him there, and I know a lot of other people do have Kyler Murray in the top 5 dynasty quarterbacks. I was sitting at the 206, the 205 and the 206 heading into the draft thinking, okay, if Burrow's there, I'm probably going to be taking Joe Burrow unless for some other reason the board gets pushed and I get other players. So, yes, I didn't land with him. Burrow did go right before my picks at 204. But yeah, just the fact that you're going to be able to get an asset who's going to be on your team for a long time, is going to be able to produce. And even if you have another quarterback like Kyler Murray, you then have 2 of them. Someone else is going to need a quarterback. Someone's going to be able to or willing to pay you, pay up for one of those great quarterback prospects who can last in their team for a long time. And so I do think, Joe Burrow at this point is just a slam dunk pick. And with that said, we have done it. We have gone through 11 prospects. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for sticking around. I know this one was a long haul episode. I'll try to keep them shorter in the future, but thank you so much for sticking around. Feel free to now drop some comments, opinions, any discussion down in the comments below. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. You can find me at Sawyer_FF. And I hope to see you come back next week when we're going to break down the 5th and final tier that I want to go through of my Dynasty rookie rankings, as well as I will point out some nice deep sleepers that you should be targeting in your 3rd and 4th round of rookie drafts. Thank you, everybody, and take care.